All right, I'm recording again, so we got all that.
Oh, yeah. We're going to have to cut that out.
So now we hate Tesla, we hate Steve Jobs, we hate Bitcoin. Any other memes we should shit on while we're...
We don't have enough time.
We don't? Exactly true. I'll put my list away. Okay, let me drop... We kind of talked about the case against critical thinking. So I'm going to drop a couple of things on you now, and some of it's going to be the case for critical thinking, and some of it's going to be my kind of personal approach to this whole thing. So I think kind of a good starting point, we mentioned in the very beginning how like people today have so many choices in front of them, right? And you mentioned that like we live in a world where so many things are done for you, so you don't necessarily have to think about how they're done. And I think that's a really key point, because at some point in your maturation or life cycle, that makes it sound weird, you're going to want to contribute to one of those things in a significant way. I think most people kind of organically come to that realization that, you know, this and this works for them, but they're now kind of at the edge of something that doesn't work that well, and they have an opportunity to contribute to make it work better. And I think that's another critical thinking trigger that's not necessarily something going wrong. It's that I need to make a contribution to this that's not superficial. So for me, in the way that you and I kind of started thinking about this, it was, if I have all of these opportunities and all this information coming at me, how do I be selective about where to commit my time? And it's not even just necessarily time. It's like, how do I kind of position myself, coming back to this concept of orientation? Like, where do I want to be in a set number of years, and how should I be thinking now to kind of get to that point? And I do think the kind of narrow focused technical guy that we've been talking about has a habit of kind of burrowing and ending up where he ends up or she ends up. And, you know, that kind of fault, and it can be an easy thing to do, right? Like, I'm not saying it's not a tempting path, or I don't understand why people do that. I absolutely understand it. I just think that at a certain point, whether it's because you want to pursue something or because something didn't work out for you, you now have the opportunity or to sit back and say, okay, I have to make the next choice. And my future after I make this choice is going to be my responsibility. And I think that responsibility concept was another one that kicked in when we were talking earlier. And I think this is, for me, this is so far beyond just the job area. It's like, because your job is, like, we talked about the work to live versus live to work, quote unquote, paradox. Like, even if you don't like your job and you're not really, like, you don't identify with your job, you're going to spend at least 8 hours a day there in most cases. So, like, you want to be doing something that's contributing to you yourself as a person, or that you're at least comfortable or that's consistent with, you know, what you think of yourself. And I think that, you know, there's also kind of a point in your life that your audience is probably approaching or kind of at now, where the number of possibilities that are open to them are as broad as they're ever going to be. So I think the two things that kind of limit your opportunities are ignorance, which when you're young, you basically don't really know what's going on. And as you mature, you kind of learn, and then you can kind of pick your route from there. But then as you get older, you specialize. So it's kind of this like, I don't know, what's this shape? Like a funnel. It's two funnels.
I don't want to say pyramid because that's my favorite shape.
It's two pyramids stacked on top of each other.
Right. On the
long side.
Yeah.
Come on, it's gotta be a better shape than that.
I don't know, it's like an oblong oval.
It's like a reverse hourglass.
Reverse hourglass. Like an infinity.
It's a giant paradox. Okay, it's a shape that's narrow at the top and the bottom and wide in the middle, whatever you want to call it.
Sure.
Leave that to the engineers.
Not this kind of engineer.
Yeah, no, not this one. Not the electrical. No, or whatever you are. Business engineer.
Who knows?
You know, I told somebody I was going to be a social engineer one time, and he's like, that's not possible. Like, straight up. Didn't, like, think about it or contemplate it. He's just like, fucking no. You can't do that. So, fuck you, well, guy. You know who you are.
I mean, if he said.
Yeah, no.
I mean, should we critically think about that? I think no.
No. I think we should just refuse it outright. Okay, so anyway, so there's this point in your life where, like, the number of opportunities that you're now cognizant of is as broad as it's ever going to be, and then you kind of pick a path through it, and then reality tends to, like, fold those opportunities in on you so that your pathway narrows going forward. So, like, I think when you're 10 and when you're 70, your life options are actually like counterintuitively pretty similar. Like, unless you did a lot of things right prior to becoming super old, you probably don't have your health and your finances have probably restricted your options quite a bit.
Sure. Yeah.
And you know, there's arguments to be made that actually that happens when you're 30, because now at least you've had some maybe labor force participation and you know what your skill set is and you're a little bit more transferable. We can talk about that if you want. I wouldn't be opposed to that. But I do think like mentally, in terms of when you're best situated to set yourself up, it's actually at that maybe post-high school, pre-university stage. And that's kind of, when I started my podcast before this, what I wanted to talk to people about, and what we kind of have talked to people about is like people kind of come on thinking they're going to talk about their jobs, but we ask them, what were you thinking before you even got into your job? And that's what we want to trigger in the people who are that age now.
Right.
Yeah, so that's kind of the context. Like, and I really think that when you make those decisions and 5 years after that decision, you now have the opportunity to reflect and say, okay, like what did I do well and what did I do poorly when I made that decision and how did it work out for me? And that also kind of comes into what you were saying about if everything's going great, do I have an impetus to actually think about this properly and prepare myself for the possibility that it's not going to be great forever? Like it is kind of a personal psychological thing that's happening there. Anyway, so that's kind of how I got started thinking about this for this discussion. And so the first thing I want to do is just define critical thinking and say, I think given the context that we just kind of set, critical thinking is the ability to take information that's coming at you in the world and use like a set of skills or a set of tools to actually assess that information for truthfulness and just kind of like use that information the way that you want to use it. And I think a lot of that, like I just mentioned, is orientation, and a little bit of it is like you're now in a scenario where you're invested in the outcome, so now you need to actually think it through in a full kind of capacity.
Yep.
So yeah, I don't know. Sorry, I just talked for a long time. Do you want to?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with 99.9% of all of that, just because it's, yeah, I think you touched on all the right key points. I think I would do a disservice by
you want to fight over the point one?
Trying to, like, I don't know, add in my 2 cents. So
okay, I'm just gonna keep ranting.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so when you go through critical thinking, or you kind of like Google critical thinking, and you say, how do I become a better critical thinker? The first thing that you typically see are, these are the reasons why you're not thinking straight right now. And in particular, strands of thought or like psychology, like behavioral psychology was kind of the field that said like consumers tend to make non-rational decisions because their decisions are kind of stuck in these, they use kind of certain mechanisms or heuristics to make decisions that lead them to incorrect outcomes. Or like if you think about it as if you are the like most rational person, that wouldn't be the decision that you should make. And this is why people don't make those. So a classic example is like a scenario where someone gives, like someone in your class or in the experiment you're in or whatever, $100. And they say, okay, you're getting $100 and there's a guy sitting across the table from you and you can give that guy any amount of money that you want and you're going to take home the rest. But the catch is that guy has the option to veto the entire thing so that no one gets any money if he's not satisfied with the amount that you give him. Right? And so like the strictly like economical scenario is that guy should be happy he's getting anything. Like you were given 100, you don't have to give him anything. If he gets 1, he had 0 before, now he has 1, he should kind of shut the fuck up about it and go home and take his 1. But that's not really what you see happen. You see, because they know the rules too, right? So as soon as they don't get 50%, they say, hey, I have the power to get you 0. So it's actually like gives me some odd irrational sense of satisfaction to make sure you get 0 if you try to treat me unfairly in this scenario. So that's one of the classic things where it's like, you know, if we consider this strictly as like a loss gain or like a one-time scenario benefit opportunity, human decision making is not always predictable, or it's not always successful even though the mistakes are predictable. So again, other things you kind of learned about, like logical fallacies that are common that people make, and that's something that you kind of brought up before too. Other like heuristics, like the way that you frame a certain question can determine what answers people lean towards. A lot of applications that people selling things would probably use to sell those things better to their consumers. And the way that most of these kind of resources or books or what have you approach it is they say, okay, if you want to be a critical thinker, here's a list of mistakes. Don't make these mistakes. And I really just think that that does not like hit home with anyone. I mean, I think people read them and they think like, yeah, man, I totally made that mistake. Or like, yeah, I read your little problem scenario and like, I fell for it. So wow, I'm not a critical thinker. And then they put the book down and they feel happy with themselves and they can use the label now and that's kind of the end of the process. Whereas the approach that I would like to see taken more often is this is how you should approach the world to create an accurate model of what's going on in the world. And you should use critical thinking to decide when people's claims or their projects or whatever you're analyzing are falling short of being an accurate model of reality. And all critical thinking really, like at a high level, should be is being able to identify the gap between an accurate conception of reality or data that you might have that would paint an accurate conception of reality and data that you actually have. So it's really just like a gap. And you can use those heuristics to say like, yeah, like, you know, they cause people to make predictable mistakes. But how do you even know you're making a mistake if you don't know what you're trying to do? Right? And what you're ultimately trying to do, like, if you're critically thinking, is create that accurate map. And really, when you're assessing claims, all you're asking is, how is this falling short of perfect accuracy? Or where should I be doubtful that this is going to create a perfect model? Right?
Yeah.
This is my approach.
So I think the challenge with a lot of that is the one term that you mentioned often, which is accuracy. So accuracy, which we probably also have to define, is going to be based on measurement, and measurement is a very challenging thing.
Yeah.
Right? If we were all good at measuring things accurately, then arguably we wouldn't have a critical thinking issue. Right?
Yeah.
But so I guess maybe the question is, how do you measure something accurately? Because arguably we're being told that we are being accurate about all the decisions that we're making already.
Right.
So we're being told that we are critical thinkers, like, as a society, right?
Yeah. So let me come back to accuracy. First, I want to stop at why is it the case that we are not inherently targeting accuracy? Like, we kind of had the technical guy and we talked about the narrow conception, but I think there's other more like fundamental threats to why we're not putting in the extra effort to build up an accurate model of reality. And it's simply because the accurate model of reality is not always beneficial to us. Beneficial in the sense that like it doesn't always feel good to know where you sit in actual reality if you try to measure it. It doesn't always put you in good standing with the people around you, right? Like, what if you live in a super hyper religious community and you start asking questions about how and why we do certain things, you might find that people are not happy that you're asking those questions, right? Like, there's a kind of coherence aspect to it, and that's not just religious communities; it's all communities that kind of share a firm belief system,
right?
And just simply from a personal perspective, like you might, and this is where it comes down to being broader than just the workplace. It's like when you're moving through life, you kind of have this passive conception of where you sit relative to the people around you. And looking harder and more critically at that position can be very painful for you. Like, you might find out that actually you've done a bad job at managing your life so far. Or actually, when you research other people's outcomes and their life positions, they might be in places that you wish you were in, and that might be hard to deal with. So I do think that there's a kind of deep, like, I hesitate to say emotional, but and we can talk about anxiety kind of closer to the end, because I think that's part of it. But I do think that people have a personal investment in their conception of the world as it naturally is, and they threaten that conception by critical thinking. So I think that's part of the instinct to not think critically. Like, obviously there's, yes, I don't have the resources to spend on this, but there's also like, this actually makes me feel worse. So why would I devote scarce resources to feeling worse?
Right. And so, I mean, I think the argument that I can make towards that hopefully is going to relate to some of the more ambitious types that are out there, because like I was saying earlier, there's a lot of people that I talk to now that have these dreams or goals of like fixing the world or changing the world. It's like, yes, you should have those things. I'm like, I have them too. Let's do that. Right. But if you're not objective about the reality that you're in, you're just going to think that, yeah, I've already changed the world just by being here myself. And it's like, yeah, okay.
I am so influential.
And I mean, it's kind of a measurement accuracy issue, but at the end of the day, the point is if you can't figure out what's going on, you're not going to fix anything, right? So it's nice to have that dream, but and maybe you don't actually want to fix anything, and that's okay too. Like everybody has their place and their role and their own dreams and vision. But if you really do want to succeed at that, like, yeah, you have to wake up and say, hey, look, I suck at this. I need to get better at this. If I don't get better at this, I'm not going to change anything.
Yeah.
And like that's happened to me a million times. It's happening to me right now as I'm starting this business or trying to create stuff. I'm realizing, yeah, I suck at a lot of stuff. And if I'm going to get better, or if I'm going to succeed and get to all the vision and goals that I want, I need to start figuring stuff out, or I need to get better. And I need to be critical of my own abilities in certain areas because I can't just keep pretending that I'm amazing.
Yeah. And I honestly, like, I am envious and also, like, terrified by your position, because I think being an entrepreneur, kind of striking it on your own, is this very hard test of reality. And we talked earlier about how, like, we mentioned kind of accuracy being a correlation with things actually going on. But we also talked about the revenge of reality. That's kind of what I was thinking of before. Mm-hmm. And so I actually think, almost counter to your point, but not really, that if you kind of have to decide from a personal integrity perspective, do I want to be somebody who's making serious change in the world, or do I want to be perceived as somebody who's making serious change in the world? And where are those things different? And which one is my priority? And I would say, like, the risk of being the superficial kind of presenter person is exactly the thing we talked about in the first half, which is that reality will catch up with you at some point. I think very few of those people make it through their entire careers or lives without somebody eventually catching on to what they're doing. I think Elon Musk right now is kind of in a prime position for someone to be like, hey, like, the emperor is not wearing clothes here, and I know it's kind of hard for people to acknowledge, but at some point it's going to have to be done. So that's like the kind of person, like, probably the prime example right now of somebody who's kind of climbed and built this perception of himself. And I wonder, like, I really seriously wonder in 10, 20 years whether we're going to look at that kind of person the same way. But people still love Steve Jobs. Who the fuck knows?
Well,
as we've decided, fuck Steve Jobs.
And I mean, on that train of thought,
yeah,
I think I would still make the argument that I would rather be Elon Musk than most other people.
The guy doing the work that Elon Musk is taking
yeah.
credit
If
for.
I did whatever Elon Musk has done, I would still much rather be that guy than some other guy. I don't really think we're making the argument don't be Elon Musk. I think we're making the argument don't be all the other people thinking that they're Elon Musk doing nothing.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, and we can have an argument about what Elon Musk is actually contributing to his company. But right. Yeah, in the end, it's like, don't be, like, at least put a limit on the level. Like, you're going to have to play the game, right? But there should be a limit to the amount of superficiality that you're contributing to whatever endeavor you're pursuing. Mm-hmm. And you're going to have to make some decisions that are going to be hard for you, probably, where you're going to have to choose the pathway about, am I pursuing power, or am I pursuing actually change? Like, what kind of accomplishment do I actually want to have to my name at the end of the day? Mm-hmm. So, yeah, there's different possible outcomes for that. Why am I on this train of thought?
I don't know. I mean, I could keep going on it too if you want, or if you have other points you want to get to.
Yeah, if you want to make another point, the next thing I want to get to is accuracy, because I think that's a great question, and yeah,
we can go to that.
Okay, so you asked before, like, accuracy is kind of a loaded term. You say, how do you know that your conception of reality is actually accurate, or if you just maybe have as flawed a conception as everyone else, and you're just kind of promoting yours at the expense of theirs because it's better for you. Right? And actually, this is probably the most common pushback that I get when I say, hey, like, I've kind of thought about this and I think you're wrong about this to someone. And they say, well, of course you think I'm wrong. Like, you're coming from a position that's better for you if you're right. I'm coming from a position that's better for me if I'm right. So, like, throw our hands up in the air. What can we possibly do?
Right.
And I think that's exactly the wrong position. You know what? There are some scenarios where that's correct, and I think that people are kind of educated nowadays in this kind of very progressive fashion to be like, consider everyone's experiences and consider that you're probably missing information. And it's weird because I think that's actually like a kind of next level opinion. Like, I think if you told that to someone from like the 1900s, they'd be like, no, like, obviously I'm right. What the fuck are you talking about? And now we're in the 2000s and we're like, well, no, obviously I'm wrong. What the fuck are you talking about? And I think like there's a happy ground kind of in the middle there.
Yeah.
Like everyone has their own unique experiences, yes, but we all have access to a set of tools that can make our perception of reality more accurate over time, right? And like eventually you're going to have a scenario where some people are continuously employing those tools to improve their accuracy and other people are not. And then you're going to have different conceptions of reality that are not competing. And I don't think like it's necessarily biased or like a tribal or like selfish thing to say, like, yes, I've employed those tools more effectively than somebody whose belief system I'm competing with, and that's why I have more confidence in it. In fact, I actually think that's the most objective thing you could say. And it's actually has the double benefit of being objective and being democratic, because anybody can come do it. Like, I'm not saying I used these special tools that nobody has access to and that gives me a unique perception of reality. No. I'm saying, like, I use these tools that you can literally use. But if you haven't used them, I'm not really going to be receptive to your vision of reality because you're not really taking your own biases into account. You're not measuring things. You're not looking at the latest information that's available on this thing. So, like, why are we really having this conversation?
Right. And I think the challenge with that is that so the easiest argument that I usually make that usually sits somewhat well is should someone trust my medical opinion? And
like you personally?
Me personally.
Okay.
And the first question they should ask is, well, are you a doctor? And my answer is going to be no, I'm not. And they're like, well, no, then I'm not going to trust your medical opinion. And I say, correct. You should not. Right?
But not for that reason.
Why?
Well, okay, maybe for that reason. But okay, let's talk about, I think that's a great example because I think the easiest kind of out when you are looking for a kind of test of someone's accuracy to reality is just to invoke their authority, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
And to say, well, you're not an authority in this field, so maybe you don't have the right beliefs about it. And
Sure. But at the same time, and the reason I use doctor is because doctors, even if there's always a distribution. So you're going to have bad doctors and good doctors, which I think also people don't understand.
Yeah.
They think all engineers are geniuses. I'm like, let me tell you.
Yeah.
That's not a fact.
What is the joke? Like, what do you call the student who gets 51% in med school? Doctor.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. But we all conveniently ignore that part. But either way, even the 51% doctor, I would still make somewhat of an argument that I would still trust their medical opinion over mine.
Okay.
I would still make that argument.
Yeah.
Right. And so, sure, I agree. Fallacy of authority and all that. Like there's certain applications for it, but in this application, it's an easy one for people to understand that they probably shouldn't listen to a medical opinion of somebody who's not a doctor.
Yeah. And for the record, I actually think that appeal to authority is generally the right appeal. Like, it's not necessarily fallacious. I didn't mean to imply that.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think the caveat really is that, like, okay, maybe the authority piece of it is also not measured accurately enough. So we're assuming that because you got a degree that you're an authority figure.
Yes. And there's scope creep a lot of the times with those authorities too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So if we just assume just for now for this case study that the person with the degree or the doctorate or whatever does actually have that authority. It's like you're very easily able to make that decision. If I tell you, hey, yeah, this is my medical opinion about this, but I'm not a doctor. You're like, okay, that's nice. Get the hell out of here.
Okay,
I'm not bringing the doctor so he can tell me what's actually going on or whatever. They can tell me, right? And at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, that actually logically, critically thinking wise makes somewhat sense, right?
Yeah.
So why now are we not able to apply that in all these other scenarios? Why do you think that, I've had a thought about this and random Joe Blow person told me the same thing and I like them and they agree with me, so we're both authoritative figures in this subject now. It's like, that's nice. Is that how this works? That's how I became a doctor. How do you think I got my medical opinion that I just told you?
I had the same opinion as all my Joe Blow friends and they were just like, you're a doctor now.
Exactly, yeah. That's like...
So
This is the point.
I actually have a really comparable example of this, which is often when you're talking about, it's funny, like you ask the question, like, why do you feel the need to kind of have an opinion on this? Or like, why do you think your opinion is equivalent to someone with years and years of training? And I think in the social media world, people are more compelled than ever, and I'm also guilty of this, of having an opinion about every topic that just comes into the national conversation, right? And you don't have to. And this is, again, one of the early steps of critical thinking. You don't have to use it. No one is saying that you need to devote all your time and energy to figure this thing out. Like, the selectivity is part of the responsibility. You need to decide where to, like, deploy that for your purposes. And it's not necessarily going to be the hot topic of the day, which is very difficult because being knowledgeable about the hot topic of the day gives you kind of clout in your, like, local conversational spheres, right? So I get why people want to spend time on it, but yeah, you don't have to. And you're not going to become an expert on it overnight anyway, but yeah, we'll get back to that. So the scenario that I'm talking about is, like, tons of people have political beliefs or religious beliefs or beliefs about, I don't know, taxes or unemployment or immigration, right? And they kind of, like, I don't know why necessarily. I mean, I guess they trigger certain feelings, but they really feel like that they have the, like, obligation to communicate these ideas in public and have very like high intensity debates about them, right? And I think a really easy way to shut down those debates a lot of the time is to say, look, like, you have your opinion on this thing going on, and this is your opinion. Okay, if this was your job, okay, or not even your job, if you were the manager of someone and this was their job, and they came to you and said, hey, we should do this, or this is my opinion on this, and you said why, and they said the same reason that you just gave me, what would you say to them? Like, can you imagine, like, somebody saying, well, you know, I just feel this way, or this is just important to me and I don't think it's fair. Like, if someone said to you as a manager, you'd be like, okay, go sit the fuck down at your desk and do your fucking job and don't have any more opinions because you're obviously an idiot.
Well, if I was the manager, yes. If I was the owner, it's like, pack your bag.
Yeah,
you're done, son.
I don't want to even see you.
It's over. And I don't know why we hired you in the first place. So.
Yeah, and everybody has this, you know, like, when you're at work, everybody knows who's kind of good at the job and who's not. So, like, people have this, they know what competence looks like. They just fail to realize that there's competence across different domains. And, like, again, I really don't want to get into, like, specific political instances, but you saw this when Trump got elected president too. People are like, well, you know, he was in business kinda, I think, and on this TV show, so, like, how is that not the same as just being a president? And you're like, well, it's not the fucking same thing at all. It's not even the same sphere of, like, social participation. So, number one, like, very clearly not the same thing. And number two, like, yeah, I guess there's some overlap in terms of managing people or, like, being in charge of things going on. But maybe the way that you do that is completely different. And I think, like, just to kind of end this stupid example that I didn't even want to use, like, I think a lot of his ineffectiveness as a president was because he didn't have the experience in the political sphere. He didn't have the shoulders to tap. He had a lot of people who had vested interest in taking advantage of someone who didn't know any better to get their kind of policy agenda rolling. And he was kind of picky and choosy about who to kind of ride in those scenarios. But it's hard to execute as a leader when you don't really know the mechanisms of power in that domain. And they're not the same just because there's leadership in both instances.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's... So, I mean, the word that I don't like to say, because people have a problem when I say the word, is really the problem, is kind of the point that we already made about that 51% doctor, is that doctor is arguably, according to everyone who's out of the know, that they're equal to every other doctor. Yeah. And the issue is equality, right? There isn't equality. Exactly.
The issue is equality.
The issue is equality.
Can't possibly
exactly,
use.
Yeah. Like, let's quote that. Okay. Write that down. You can write a dash and put my name next to it.
DTFC just folded right at the moment we published that.
It is what it is, man.
Okay.
51%. That 51% doctor is now as good on paper as the 99% doctor because it's on paper, right? But like you said, everybody knows which doctors are good, which employees are good. Everybody knows. And the question is, why should we allow that to be dictating what we actually do or what we think about? And maybe the answer is because there's more of the 51% doctors than the 99% doctors. right?
It very well could be the case. Or they could be the 99, maybe not 99%, but they could be maybe the top 70% doctors upon graduation, and then they kind of sink into this routine of the day-to-day life, and now they're just, prescribing the pharmaceutically approved pills and just kind of trying to deal with put out fires, I guess, is almost the best way of putting it, because it's more sympathetic. Like, I know you have a certain expertise when you go into a role, and then it's like constant anxiety and panic, and this needs to happen now all the time. And then it's like, are you really executing your skill set, or are you just really good at stopping emergencies from happening? And those are very different things, especially in the medical profession.
Right.
So, okay, so what was you kind of gave the example, we don't want to know your medical opinion, we want to know the doctor's opinion. Like, what was the take-home message from that?
So, I mean, the message is, okay, maybe we should take this to the next level, right? It's like we're asking the first question, and then we get an answer, and then we're acting on it immediately.
Right.
Right? But maybe there's a follow-up question, and that is a level of critical thinking that I think a fair number of people are not implementing.
Okay, like you're accepting the first reason that someone gives you for...
Exactly.
Yeah, and you're
right?
not going any further with it.
And even if it's just asking that same question, but ask it 10 times instead of asking it once. Like sample of one versus sample of whatever, right? Like we got a bunch of engineers and scientists or doctors or whoever that are listening in, and they're all going to be data-driven people. And yet, when we're making decisions, we're willing to accept a data point of one. A lot of the time.
Yeah, n equals 1 is poor sample size.
Exactly, right?
Yeah. Okay, so I want to get back to building up this kind of edifice of an accurate reality, and I think there's kind of two key ways to do that, and they both lead to kind of different skill sets that you should accomplish. And number one, and I'm going to say something here that kind of comes from my experience having these conversations online and elsewhere, is that like the first ingredient to an accurate conception of reality is to have the right facts. The two ingredients, just as a preview, are to have the right facts and to be able to put facts together in an appropriate way. And I honestly think like there are certain ways of doing both of those things, and if you execute them again like routinely and instinctively and absent these like kind of biases that everybody is familiar with, then that's probably the best road to creating that map of reality that's actually accurate. And it's funny because we kind of, or I don't know, we talked about this like presentation that I had put together about critical thinking, and there was a slide at the end that was like, here are 4 different kinds of questions, and there are very different ways at kind of establishing the correctness of the answer to these questions. And the first one was just like how many swans are in the world, right? So that's a pretty easy one. Like the best way to answer that question is to actually count all the swans in the world. If someone came to you and they hadn't counted anything and they said that they had the answer for you, you'd know that they were obviously not trustworthy in that area. The second one was whether you should eat like potato chips or vegetables as a snack. And the kind of message of that example was, there's no fact about the scenario that can tell you what the answer is. Like the first question you have to ask to answer that problem is, what am I trying to do? And I think that a lot of questions that people have to answer, especially in the political sphere and some other areas of life, really depend on what they're trying to do. But the biggest deficit I see in those people, even who have convictions about what they're trying to do, is that they don't take the time to get all the facts. And I really think like if you want to have an accurate conception of reality, if you want to be informed about a certain opinion, or you want to kind of be taken seriously about something that you have to say, you have to have an understanding of the facts of the scenario at a very basic level. Like someone can't be able to come up to you and say, yeah, but what about this? And just take you completely by surprise. And I think like it's very clear when people's kind of passion or enthusiasm about a subject, and you see this a lot in like activists, not that I'm necessarily like for or against any particular activist group, but I think that you see the passion, and oftentimes the factual kind of backing is not always there. So as soon as the enthusiasm or the passion kind of outstrips the facts that people have done the work to make themselves available or to make themselves aware of, that's when my kind of sensor goes off that they're not really thinking as critically as they should be, and that their map of reality is starting to become skewed in a certain direction.
Yep.
Okay, good.
That was an easy one. What's next?
Yeah.
What else you got?
So, I mean, we could do a whole episode on like on the kind of institutions that we have that are responsible for establishing facts. Because, and again, this was another point that's come up between us, is that you don't have the time to establish facts by direct experience yourself or the tools.
Right.
So it's society, I think, kind of grows and develops over time by taking sets of facts that people have done the work to discover and putting them into institutions so that they're very easily transferable to the next generation so that they can come up with different facts. And then that's what kind of creates your growth mechanism as you go forward. The issue is, if those first people didn't establish the facts correctly, or if there's updated information that needs to be incorporated, that threatens the whole foundation of the structure, right? So it's like, we kind of, and like technology is kind of a different sphere, because technology kind of relies on the integrity of the fundamental facts, or else it just won't work. But I think a lot of people's beliefs about how society should work, or about like certain facts in the social world around them, don't really, they don't test them against reality as much as technology does.
Yeah, so I think the point that I'm going to try and relate this to is the concept of correlation versus causation, right? Which is basically, you see something happening and then you see the result and you're like, okay, these must be tied. And then maybe you see it again and you're like, oh, well, yeah, they're definitely tied. And then you see it a third time and you're like, okay, 100% sure, I'm good. Like, I don't need to ever think about this again. Every time I see that, I know this is going to happen. And I think the problem is that, especially with technology, we're now being fed these facts, right, of information, and there's no reason to disagree with them because we're seeing the correlation. Every time somebody says this thing, like, this thing happens. Right. Or they talk about this after that happened, and they're like, oh, yeah, this obviously makes sense. We're just constantly correlating things together. But without that critical thinking level, we're not actually thinking about, is this actually why this happened? And the problem is the same problem we came up with at the beginning, was that efficiency-wise, I don't need to ever think about breathing, because like every time I open my mouth or open my nose to breathe, like air comes in and I'm still alive. So I don't need to think about this, right? It's a causation in my mind, even though it might just be a correlation. And I think the distinction between those, if you don't understand the difference, you start to think that a lot of things are correlation, or a lot of things are causations when they might just be correlations.
Right. Yeah.
Right. It's basically like a root cause analysis, which again is not something that they teach everybody. That's like kind of an engineering philosophy or strategy to analyze or problem solve stuff. But that's the strategy we should be trying to use in all these areas, because otherwise we're just saying, okay, well, I saw A and now I got B, right? And every time I see that A and B, that's why I like to use numbers, and I like to use the stock market as the easiest example, because all the Bitcoin geniuses are now hopefully seeing that causation they saw may have just been a correlation, right? And I think that might actually be part of the answer, is that people need to fail. I think people need to fail at whatever their genius level correlation or causation is
to trigger that they need to think more,
because otherwise, realistically, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I totally agree with that. And there are plenty of scenarios, like we've already discussed, that makes sense. And you shouldn't bother thinking about this if it already works. Right.
Okay, so we used the stock market a bunch of times as an example, but I know we had another context that we wanted to incorporate into some of this, which was the gym and weightlifting kind of at the gym. And what you just said is actually my number one reason for why, I think the stock market and the gym captures so many mistakes that people who enter those fields just naively make as soon as they get in, right? And correlation causation is a really easy one, because it's like, you see the jacked guy at the gym, you want to be the jacked guy, and you assume whatever the jacked guy is doing at the gym is causing the jackedness. We're coining here.
Yeah.
And so you just kind of follow in that procedure. And the critical thinking kind of approach to that is, what that guy's doing at the gym might be a contribution to his status, but there might be other contributions that outweigh that, to the point that you kind of mimicking those behaviors is not going to be sufficient to get you to that result, right? There was a really good example of this we used to use on the bodybuilding.com forums years ago when I used to post there, which was like, okay, would you do what this guy says? And he was like this really huge bodybuilder guy. And it was like, or would you do what this like old lady says? And it was like, okay, you'd put the poll up and everybody would be like, why the fuck would I listen to this old lady? She's not jacked, right? I want to be this jacked guy. And then you learn when you scroll down that the old lady is the jacked guy's coach. Right? Nice. So it's like this guy looks like that because of what this lady's telling him, and none of you clowns even thought about saying like, well, what is their advice?
Right.
Or like, what are they telling you to do? Right?
Exactly.
So it's a really powerful example because it's like, it fucks with that kind of correlation causation relationship.
Right.
So, but the other thing, again, coming back to the stock market and why I think the stock market and the gym are both together excellent examples is because when you lose in the stock market, it hurts. So you don't want to lose. But when you lose in the gym, you just can't do it. And like, I think in the stock market, you can have success for a really long time before you kind of encounter that failure that you're talking about. But in the gym, you hit the failure when you put a weight on the bar that you can no longer lift off the ground or push off your chest or whatever have you. So the gym is one of my favorite places because if you're not thinking correctly about how to make improvements, you find out fast. Right? And it's almost like this ideal iterative opportunity because you can go the very next day. Like the time between trials can be very short. And you can say like, okay, today I could lift this. In the interim, I did this behavior supposedly to get better. And now it's tomorrow, so I should be able to lift this. And if you can't, bam, theory out the window. Like you got to recheck your assumptions. Yeah. And really, if you work out every day for a year, you've gotten probably stronger and a hell of a lot smarter because you've had to recheck those assumptions every time you've hit a block.
Right.
Love the gym.
Yeah. And I think the reason that both of those examples are way easier to use, and I think we both kind of relate to them, not just because we're involved with them, but because I think they're numerically easy to argue, right? And that's my problem with a lot of the arguments that are out there is that if you can't quantify something, which a lot of situations you can't quantify easily, right? And that just takes us back to measurement accuracy and all that. These difficult to measure things, people can come up with logical, quote unquote, arguments that seem to make it make sense. And that's the real problem, is like they're just measuring this incorrectly, but we don't have a real way to measure it against them to disprove them. So what's the easiest thing to do? It's like, okay, maybe it makes sense. And then to tie into your passion argument, well, it's like, I actually also believe this. So I'm passionate about this. They're passionate about this. They made what seems to be a logical argument, despite I might not know what logic is or how to make a logical argument anyway.
Beyond where I would have been, like what I would have accepted
exactly.
before. Right? Yeah.
But there's no way to really disprove it because I don't have a number that says I literally can't bench 3 plates. It doesn't matter what I say or how I try and like work around this. Yeah. I can't do it. I physically have tried 1,000 times or however many times, whatever. Yeah.
Okay, so I have a solution for that. And this actually leads into a point I was going to make that's generally good practice, something that's very difficult to do, but it kind of addresses your concerns with measurement. Is if you have a strong belief about something and you want to test the accuracy of your belief, make a bet about the future related to that belief. So if you think that this is the best approach to lifting more weight at the gym and somebody else thinks that there's a different approach that's better, make a bet. And and I think Alex and I were talking about this a little bit last night because that was a section of this book actually, and it gives you like a list of propositions or like facts about the world. And it says, okay, like, tell me if you think these are true or false. And then give me like a percentage like that you're sure about that. And you can actually use those numbers to say, like, okay, I'd be willing to bet this much money for this return in the future because the return, like the risk of the return exceeds the risk that I think I'm going to be wrong about this belief. And again, like the stock market ends up being like a really quick kind of way to build all this into a single structure. But you can literally go up to people like without being a dickhead and be like, okay, like for example, and you're going to laugh because this guy's definitely going to listen to this, so he's going to know I'm calling him out. But a guy that I work with basically said like, we've seen a couple lockdowns and like people have kind of gotten used to the idea of like government lockdowns for like socially threatening reasons. So like the next lockdown that we should expect will be for climate change because the government's very invested in climate change and like obviously our impact on the environment was greatly lessened when we were all home. So that should be like a mitigation effort we're going to see in the future. And I said, okay, that sounds like bullshit to me. Like when is this going to happen? and where is it going to happen, and let's put some money on it. And he's like, well, like it's going to happen at some time in the future, and like undetermined time. And I'm like, oh, okay, like weird that you can't like specify with precision like when you think this is actually going to happen. And like the more we talked about it, the more it felt like he was kind of backtracking from that initial position, and it was like, yeah, well, okay, like maybe I'm not actually so sure about that, to the point that maybe I shouldn't really be putting that idea out in the world at all. Bam, suck it.
You got him.
No, but I do think like if you believe in something, you should have precision. You should be asking about timelines. You should be asking, where is the opportunity? Like we talked about that in the stock thread we had on the DTFC forum about inflation, right? Like there are financial vehicles out there that you can use to make whatever bet about the economy or about kind of things at a macro level that you want to make. If you think that inflation is going to go up, right? There are assets that you can pursue that are going to be undervalued because everybody else is anticipating inflation or not anticipating inflation, right? There's always the opportunity, and that's one of the great things about financial instruments that I think people underestimate, right? Like we think like, oh, the banks make all these complicated things just to get the rich richer, but actually they just allow people to make bets on the future against each other, and that's what a lot of them are really doing. And if you are on the opposite side of that, like Michael Burry from The Big Short, right? Like he literally took bets against all the banks, and they literally built the things that would allow those bets to be made for their own profit, and they just happened to lose.
Right.
So like the equipment is there. It's just up to you to kind of gauge your confidence and find somebody who's actually willing to make that argument against you and not become a, degenerate gambler.
Yeah. Unless you win.
Unless you win, yeah.
Then you're good.
If you keep winning, then you're obviously right about it.
Otherwise, you can just be on when will the insanity stop, and then you'll be famous anyway. So then you become rich. So
you know what? I wonder about Dave Portnoy sometimes from Barstool Sports, because his whole thing was sports gambling for like a really long time, and then it was like sports journalism, and then it was like running his company. But I would wonder in a conversation like this if you were like, hey, like how much of the skill that you used gambling do you incorporate into running this company? I guarantee he would say like every fucking day I use those skills.
Yeah.
He'd probably say fucking just that way too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, and now when you're putting money on the line, there's things that you learn about yourself.
Exactly. Yeah. Which, I mean, that's obviously not a suggestion that I'm making to anybody specifically.
Not investing advice.
Yeah, this is not investing advice. No. I'm not your investment advisor. If you want to give me your money to invest, I will do that. That is, there is no guarantee on your return. Blah blah blah. Disclaimer.
Don't do that.
I'll take your money. That's the bottom line. But yeah, no, for sure. That's the interesting part, and I actually can't believe that we hadn't figured that part out before. That you learn so many different things just by putting yourself in these scenarios.
Yeah.
Actually putting, like you said, like putting money on it, right? Or gambling, or not gambling, but I guess like putting your money where your mouth is, right? Because, and at the end of the day, it all just comes down to the numbers, which is kind of what I was trying to say before, which is you got to make a bet or you got to make a decision. And then you got to see whether you actually succeeded or not. Right. So like, I mean, my dad's going to laugh, but this is the argument that I've been making to him about a bunch of stuff recently is, what's that thing? With the cat in the box.
Schrodinger's cat.
Schrodinger's cat.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Right. So I'm like, my theory right now is that everybody lives in this Schrodinger's cat world.
Okay.
Where they're like, okay, I said this thing. Like the cat's alive, man. Or the cat's dead. I don't know.
Okay.
But
let's not check.
Yeah. It's in the box. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
It's like it's in the box. It's one of those two things. We're good.
Yeah.
Let's move on.
I'm 100% sure it's one of those two things.
Exactly. But I'm also like 99% sure it's one of those.
It's one of those. Okay.
Actually, I'm 110% sure. And that's whichever one I pick, like that's the one that it is. But I don't want to check it, or I don't think we need to because that's how confident I am. I'm 110%. Like, why would you ever disagree with me, right? And I think that's the problem is we don't want to measure. So that's what I like about the stock market is make your bet. I don't care what it is. It doesn't really matter. Make your bet and let's check it tomorrow. Every single day I want you to do this.
Right.
What's Tesla going to be? Is it going to go up tomorrow or down tomorrow? I don't care which one it is. Just make a decision, make a prediction, explain why you made that. If it's arbitrary because you're just collecting data, that's fine. Who cares, right?
Yeah.
But check it tomorrow. Find out if it's true. Don't leave the cat in the box.
Right. Okay.
Right.
And I like that the stock market kind of application to this example too, because we talked about people being hesitant to provide timelines, right, for their bets. But when you make a timeline, like a time specific bet on the stock market, you're going to lose money every day that you're wrong.
Right.
Right. And that's a huge incentive to establish the timeline for when you're actually going to expect profit on this. And like, we talk about risk being higher for long-term bets because different things can come into effect, or like there's compounding in the time that you're missing out on. And yeah, no, I think it's a really good way to test yourself.
Yeah.